She starts giving away all of her beloved books, all of her favorite clothes. And her mom gets mad and says, "Until you can pay for your own clothes, don't give away the ones that I buy." Mom probably had a point. She gets back to school after Christmas break and maps, quote, "I mapped out my day to spend as much time as possible in prayer, either in the chapel or on the hillside." She visits her spiritual director. She visits the monastery in Alhambra and says, "When can I enter?" And the Reverend Mother says, "Have you finished high school?" And she says, "Not yet." And she says, "Well, you have to finish high school." And she says, "Why?" And Reverend Mother says, "We don't want any dumb Carmelites in here." So she sets about trying to figure out how she can finish high school in 3 years rather than 4. And then she goes home and tells her parents at the dinner table, "Mom, Dad, I want to be a Carmelite nun." And their facial expression does not even change. Her dad says nothing. She presses him again, and he says, "Well, if you need my permission, you have it." She asks her mom, "If you really want to know what I think," she said, "I think this idea will pass in a year or 2, so I'll wait until then before I say any more about it." I pressed her. "Well, what if next year I still want to be a Carmelite? What are you going to say then?" She replied, "I don't think there's going to be a then, so I can't tell you what I'd say then." And that was the end of talking over my vocation with my parents. Not just then, but forever. It's pretty common, actually, boys and girls, for parents sometimes to not be overly supportive and excited about their child locking themselves away in a monastery. She starts taking on a whole regime of penances and mortification. Like an athlete in training, I began testing my strength of will, always in search of something I could give up for God, either by denying or going contrary to myself. So she doesn't want to be a spiritual wimp. She wants to take on the spiritual Get Tough program, training her will. To this end, I not only gave up the few foods I liked, but ate anything that repulsed me: bugs, dirt, a stray hair, raw eggs, a blind grab into the garbage pail. In short, I took every chance to thwart my own will and desires, and when I noticed I was attached to giving up things, I would take them back, reverse myself, just to offer up my feelings of guilt about doing so. Eventually, she develops a case of scruples and becomes somewhat confused about what she should be giving up and what not, and why, and her motivations. Without the self-discipline needed to unify my energies and focus my whole life solely on God, I would not have been ready to move into deeper waters. Finally, however, I reached a point where I could not discern what I really liked or disliked anymore. At this point, my ascetic practices didn't do anything for me. They did not seem to bring about any progress or make any difference to my interior state. From here on, come what may, I could take it or leave it. So now she's 16, and she meets again with her spiritual director, Father Columbanus. He was rather short, rather balding, rather quiet, rather sad, rather intensely great spiritual genius. After that, he asked, "How much time do you figure you spend in prayer every day?" That answer took some calculating because it depended on whether I was at home or at school. I figured no less than 4 to 5 hours in the chapel or church every day, also several hours before going to sleep each night, and at school, at least an hour or 2 out of doors every day. So you can do the math, but it's probably like 8 hours a day in silent prayer. And she starts telling him about these times when she's not feeling God's presence, known as moments of aridity. The first time it occurred almost 4 months after her conversion experience, and it lasted 1 hour. And then 3 weeks later, it happened again and lasted 2 hours. And then 2 weeks after this, it lasted 6 hours. And then it would last a full day, and then 2 days, And so it's obviously increasing in frequency and in duration. And she wants to understand what's going on. So she goes to the school library, closes her eyes and points, and then opens her eyes and sees a book and starts following her way along, not taking her eyes off the book. Because I felt the need for some insight into what was going on, I searched through numerous books on the spiritual life, but found nothing helpful or explanatory. One day, however, after begging God to send help and trusting Him to guide my choice, I decided to go to the school library, stand in the doorway, randomly focus my eyes on a book, any book, and take it down. The book I focused on was on the top shelf against one of the back walls. Keeping my eyes on the book so as to not lose sight of it, I groped my way around to the book stacks to get it. And what was it? The Life of St. John of the Cross by Father Bruno, Discalced Carmelite. It didn't take more than a day before I came to Bruno's short exposition of John's written works that included something about the, quote, knights. A few things he went over seemed to address my spiritual situation perfectly, and with this knowledge I was greatly encouraged by the Discalced Carmelite understanding of spiritual life. So she starts comparing her experiences to what she's reading about. Before the onset of these bouts of aridity, I had read St. Teresa's Way of Perfection and found that, according to her descriptions of the various levels of prayer, I was already enjoying the, quote, unitive prayer. My understanding was that this prayer belonged to the unitive state, which she seemed to regard as the highest possible, as far as the contemplative life of prayer, in the contemplative life of prayer, as anyone could go. At first, this did not seem right to me, but I thought, what if she is right? What if I am already in the unitive state? My answer, it doesn't make any difference. All I know is that there has got to be more to the spiritual life than the unitive state. Further to go, that is. Although down the road I realized I was not in the unitive state, still this mistake had consequences that I never placed any value on the unitive state or even getting there. It's the fifth mansion, according to St. Teresa of Avila, which, as I mentioned, she entered just a few weeks after she entered Carmel, and which I'll talk about next time. So she's reading about infused contemplation, trying to understand what it is. And so she asked Father Columbanus. On one occasion, he told me that in his own novitiate in Ireland, if a novice had not reached infused contemplation after 2 years, he was dismissed. He was told that while he likely had a vocation, it was not to our Discalced Carmelite order. Many years later, when I quoted this to another Carmelite priest, he said, "How things have changed. Today, if after 2 years a novice is still with us and has all his buttons, we thank God for that." So she complains, nobody really understands me, no one that I'm reading, and Father Columbanus says, I have just the book for you. The title was The Spiritual Doctrine of Elizabeth of the Trinity by Pierre Philippon, Dominican. Unfortunately, he said, I can't loan it to you because the fathers will give me holy heck if they find it missing from our library, but you will probably be able to find a copy in the Catholic bookstore. And then he said, she's for you. You will understand her. In the whole church, I fit in more with Elizabeth's spirituality than anyone else's. It seemed we had been given certain graces in common. In this young French Discalced Carmelite nun, I finally found a kindred soul. Down the road, I would be equally grateful to St. John of the Cross for his book, The Spiritual Canticle. I virtually lived the book. Together, these two books were my sole reading during the next 10 years. In a way, they pretty much summed up my journey. And she says that actually what she really liked were Father Philippon's comments, his commentary in being a mystical theologian that he was on Blessed Elizabeth's experiences. She was later canonized Saint Elizabeth of the Trinity. She was a contemporary of Saint Therese of Lisieux in France, and Bernadette said that